In the vast darkness between stars, where civilizations rise and fall like dying embers, there exists a truth that most species refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes the most unlikely savior comes from the most feared corner of the galaxy. Humans were known throughout the Galactic Consortium as the Death Walkers, a species so violent, so unpredictable, that even their acts of mercy were viewed with suspicion. Their homeworld was quarantined, their ships monitored, their very presence a source of unease among the more civilized races. But when a small transport vessel carrying the last surviving member of the ancient Kithra bloodline crashed on the human colony world of New Haven, everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity was about to change. What follows is not just a story of survival, but a testament to the power of compassion that transcends species, prejudice, and the cold calculations of galactic politics. It's about how a single human's refusal to let a child die would reshape the balance of power across 1,000 worlds. The Kithra called humans monsters. They were about to discover that some monsters choose to protect rather than destroy. The mining facility on New Haven had seen better days, but Dr. Sarah Chun didn't mind the rust-stained walls or the constant hum of atmosphere processors. After 15 years working on frontier worlds, she had learned to appreciate the simple pleasure of a functioning medical bay and patients who actually wanted her help. The human colonies on the Rim were rough, dangerous places, but they were also honest in a way the core worlds had forgotten. She was reviewing supply inventories when the emergency klaxon started wailing. Sarah's coffee mug hit the floor, splattering the bitter brew across her boots as she rushed to the communication console. The voice of mining supervisor Jackson crackled through the static-filled speakers, his usual calm shattered by whatever he was witnessing. All medical personnel to emergency stations. We've got a crash site approximately 12 kilometers northwest of the main facility. Unknown vessel. Appears to be non-human design. Initiating rescue protocols immediately. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing her emergency kit and activating the facility's trauma protocols. New Haven was technically neutral territory, a human colony that existed in the buffer zone between the Galactic Consortium and the Independent Systems Alliance. They rarely saw alien vessels, and when they did, it usually meant trouble. The journey to the crash site took 23 minutes in the all-terrain medical transport, every second stretching like an eternity as Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. The scanner readings Jackson had transmitted painted a grim picture. The vessel had hit the rocky terrain at incredible speed, carving a kilometer-long scar across the landscape before finally coming to rest against the base of a cliff. What remained of the ship was barely recognizable as a spacecraft. The sleek curves that marked consortium design were twisted and broken, the hull split open like a cracked egg. Emergency foam had already hardened around the wreckage, containing whatever toxic materials might be leaking from the damaged systems. 3 other rescue teams had arrived before her, their equipment scattered around the perimeter as they worked to cut through the twisted metal. "Status report," Sarah called out as she approached Team Leader Morrison, a grizzled veteran who had been working crash sites since before she had graduated medical school. Morrison's face was grim behind his environmental mask. "It's bad, document real bad. We've detected life signs, but they're fading fast. The problem is we can't identify the species. The bioscanners are giving us readings we've never seen before." Sarah activated her own scanner, studying the scrolling data with growing concern. The life sign was definitely there, weak but persistent, but Morrison was right about the readings being unusual. The metabolic patterns didn't match any species in the standard medical database, and some of the biological markers were unlike anything she had encountered in 2 decades of frontier medicine. "Have we established communication?" she asked, already knowing the answer from Morrison's expression. "Negative. Whatever's in there, it's not responding to standard consortium protocols. Could be unconscious, could be the communication systems are down, or..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew that, or could mean the survivor was already too far gone to respond. The cutting team had been working for over an hour when they finally broke through the hull. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across their faces as they carefully widened the opening, their movements cautious despite the urgency of the situation. Sarah pressed forward with her medical kit, her heart pounding as she prepared to face whatever lay beyond the twisted metal. The interior of the ship was a maze of damaged corridors and collapsed bulkheads. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting everything in a red-tinged glow that made the destruction seem even more ominous. The rescue team moved carefully through the wreckage, their scanners leading them deeper into the ship toward the source of the life signs. They found a survivor in what appeared to be a cargo hold, though the impact had twisted the space beyond easy recognition. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as her flashlight beam fell across the small form huddled in the far corner of the compartment. It was a child. That much was immediately obvious, despite the obvious alien features. The body structure was humanoid, but more delicate, with proportions that spoke of a species adapted to lower gravity than Earth normal. The skin was a pale blue-gray, marked with darker striations that might have been natural coloring or trauma-related discoloration. Most striking were the large, dark eyes that dominated the child's face, eyes that tracked toward the rescue team with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. "My God," whispered Morrison, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and horror. "It's just a kid." Sarah was already moving, her medical training overriding the shock of first contact with an unknown species. The child was clearly in critical condition, its breathing shallow and irregular, its body temperature far below what her scanner indicated should be normal for its species. Multiple lacerations covered its arms and torso, and there was clear evidence of internal trauma from the crash. But it was alive, and that was what mattered. "I need a sterile field established immediately," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of emergency medicine. "Full biological isolation protocols until we can determine if there are any cross-species contamination risks." As the rescue team worked to set up the portable medical unit, Sarah found herself studying the child more closely. The alien features that had been so striking at first glance began to seem more familiar, more understandable. The expressions that flickered across the child's face were recognizable in any species: pain, fear, confusion, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that these strange beings might be able to help. The child's clothing was torn and blood-stained, but Sarah could see that it had once been beautiful. The fabric was unlike anything she had seen, seeming to shift color in the emergency lighting, and the cut suggested a level of sophistication that spoke of an advanced civilization. Whoever this child was, they came from wealth and status. As Sarah began her examination, she noticed something else that made her blood run cold. The child's injuries weren't all from the crash. Some of the wounds were older, partially healed, and bore the distinctive marks of weapons fire. This wasn't just a crash victim. This was a refugee, someone who had been running for violence before their ship had failed them. The scanner readings continued to puzzle her. The child's physiology was unlike anything in the medical databases, but there were enough similarities to human biology that she could make educated guesses about treatment protocols. The bone structure suggested a calcium-based skeleton, the blood chemistry indicated oxygen-breathing metabolism, and the neural activity patterns were consistent with higher intelligence. Most importantly, the child was responding to her treatment. The 4-drip she had established was stabilizing the blood pressure, and the pain medication seemed to be providing some relief. The large, dark eyes followed her movements with increasing alertness, and she thought she detected the beginning of trust in that alien gaze. "Doc," Morrison called from outside the sterile field. "We've got a problem. I just received word from the facility. There's a consortium patrol ship in system, and they're demanding to inspect any crash sites. Standard salvage protocols." Sarah's hands never paused in their work as she processed this information. Consortium salvage protocols were notoriously harsh when it came to unknown technologies or species. If they classified the child as a dangerous alien artifact, the best-case scenario would be indefinite quarantine for study. The worst case didn't bear thinking about. "How long before they arrive?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. 6 hours, maybe 7 if we're lucky. They're coming in on a standard approach vector, which means they're not treating this as an emergency response. Sarah looked down at the child, who was watching the exchange with obvious intelligence despite the language barrier. Those large eyes seemed to understand that these humans were discussing its fate, and she could see the fear beginning to return to the alien features. In that moment, Dr. Sarah Chun made a decision that would change everything. She had taken an oath to do no harm, to preserve life regardless of the circumstances. That oath didn't specify human life, and she wasn't about to start making exceptions now. "We're taking the survivor back to the facility," she announced. "Full medical quarantine protocols. I'm declaring this a medical emergency that supersedes salvage rights." Morrison's eyebrows shot up. "Doc, You know that's not going to stop them if they really want access to the alien. Maybe not, Sarah replied, carefully adjusting the child's foreline, but it'll slow them down long enough for me to complete my medical evaluation. And who knows, maybe by then, we'll have established communication and can find out what this little one needs. The transport back to the facility was tense, with Sarah monitoring the child's vital signs while the rescue team worked to stabilize the makeshift medical unit. The alien child had slipped into unconsciousness, but the reading suggested it was a natural healing sleep rather than a coma. That was encouraging, though Sarah knew they were far from being out of danger. As New Haven's medical facility came into view through the transport's windscreen, Sarah found herself wondering about the child's story. Where had they come from? What had happened to their family? And why had their ship been running alone through human space when the consortium maintained such strict policies about alien vessels in this sector? She didn't know it yet, but she was about to learn that sometimes the most important questions were the ones that led to the most dangerous answers. The child she had just rescued wasn't just any alien refugee. They were the last surviving member of a bloodline that had ruled star systems when humanity was still learning to make fire. And there were forces in the galaxy that would do anything to make sure that bloodline ended with this small, frightened child. As the medical facility's doors closed behind them, Sarah Chun unknowingly stepped across a line that would reshape her understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. The real test wasn't going to be saving one alien child. It was going to be protecting that child from everyone who wanted to use them, study them, or destroy them. But Sarah had made her choice, and she was about to discover just how far one human doctor would go to keep a promise made to a pair of large, trusting alien eyes. The medical bay hummed with activity as Sarah worked through the night, running every diagnostic test she could think of while carefully monitoring her patient's response to treatment. The child had remained unconscious for 18 hours, but the vital signs were steadily improving, and the worst of the external injuries were beginning to heal with remarkable speed. It was during the early morning hours, when the facility was at its quietest, that the child finally awakened. Sarah was reviewing the latest blood work results when she heard a soft sound from the isolation unit. Not quite a whisper, not quite a whimper, but something that spoke of consciousness returning to a mind that had been lost in darkness. She turned to find the large, dark eyes open and alert, tracking her movements with an intelligence that made her breath catch. The child was trying to sit up, despite the obvious pain the movement caused, and Sarah could see the beginning of panic in those alien features as the child took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Easy, little one," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she had used with frightened children throughout her career. "You're safe now. I'm a doctor, and I'm here to help." The child's head turned toward her voice, and Sarah was struck by the depth of understanding she saw in those eyes. Even without a common language, it was clear that this was no primitive being. The intelligence looking back at her was sophisticated, analytical, and deeply afraid. Sarah moved slowly, deliberately telegraphing each motion as she approached the isolation unit. The child watched her every movement, but didn't try to flee or strike out in panic. Instead, there seemed to be a careful evaluation taking place, as if the child was trying to determine whether this strange being represented help or threat. "My name is Sarah," she said, pointing to herself and speaking clearly. "Sarah." She repeated the gesture several times, hoping that the universal nature of self-identification would translate across species barriers. The child's expression shifted, and Sarah thought she detected a flicker of comprehension. After a long moment, the child raised one delicate hand and pointed to itself, making a sound that was unlike anything in human speech. A melodic combination of tones that seemed to resonate in harmonics the human vocal cords couldn't produce. "Beautiful," Sarah whispered, then tried to approximate the sound herself. Her attempt was clumsy and obviously wrong, but the child's eyes widened in what might have been surprise or amusement. The alien tried again, this time breaking the name into smaller components, patiently repeating each section until Sarah could manage a rough approximation. The breakthrough came when the child pointed to the medical scanner in Sarah's hand and made a questioning gesture. Sarah held up the device, demonstrating its harmless nature by scanning her own hand first, showing the child the readout on the display. Understanding dawned in those large eyes, and the child extended their own hand for examination. Over the next several hours, they developed a rudimentary communication system based on gestures, drawings, and careful observation. The child was remarkably quick to understand Sarah's intentions, and equally patient in trying to communicate their own needs and concerns. It became clear that despite the obvious physical differences, the thought processes were remarkably similar to human patterns. The child's name, as near as Sarah could determine, was something like Kira Thesvelden, though the musical quality of the language made exact pronunciation impossible for human vocal cords. The child seemed to understand Sarah's limitations and accepted Kira as a workable approximation. Through careful questioning and gesture, Sarah began to piece together fragments of Kira's story. The child was indeed young, though exactly how young was difficult to determine given the species differences. There had been others on the ship, family members, Sarah gathered, but their fate remained unclear. Kira's attempts to explain what had happened to them were limited by the communication barrier, but the pain in those large eyes spoke volumes. It was during one of these communication sessions that Dr. Chun received the call she had been dreading. Supervisor Jackson's voice was tense as he informed her that the consortium patrol ship had arrived ahead of schedule and was demanding immediate access to both the crash site and any recovered materials. "They're sending down a full diplomatic team," Jackson explained, his voice carefully neutral over the comm channel, "led by Ambassador Vexturian of the Hegemony Council. They're claiming salvage rights under Article 12 of the Frontier Accords." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The Hegemony Council was dominated by the Zilithian Empire, one of the more aggressive members of the consortium. If they were sending Ambassador Vexturian, it meant they considered this situation to be of significant importance. The Zilithians were known for their harsh treatment of primitive species and their absolute belief in their own racial superiority. "How long do I have?" Sarah asked, glancing toward Kira, who had picked up on the tension in her voice and was watching with obvious concern. "They'll be here within the hour." "Doc, I have to ask, is there anything about this situation I should know?" The ambassador seemed unusually interested in the biological readings from the crash site. Sarah considered her options. Jackson was a good man, but he was also responsible for the safety of 3,000 colonists. If the consortium decided that New Haven was harboring dangerous aliens, they had the power to impose sanctions that could cripple the colony. "The survivor is a child," she said finally. "Seriously injured, still recovering from the crash. I'm treating them under standard medical protocols for unknown species contact." There was a long pause before Jackson responded. "Roger that document. I'll inform the ambassador that you're following proper medical quarantine procedures. Hopefully that will buy us some time." After the call ended, Sarah found herself staring at Kira, who had been following the conversation with obvious intelligence despite the language barrier. The child had picked up enough human body language to understand that something was wrong, and those large eyes were filled with a fear that went beyond simple confusion. Sarah had made another decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Instead of waiting for the consortium officials to arrive, she activated the facility's educational database and began teaching Kira basic human language concepts. The child's intelligence was remarkable. Within 30 minutes, they had grasped the fundamental structure of human speech and were beginning to form simple words. "Danger?" Kira asked, the human word sounding strange in their musical voice. "Conmigo?" "Yes," Sarah said honestly. "There are people coming who might want to hurt you, but I won't let that happen. I promise." The concept of a promise seemed to translate across species barriers. Kira studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then reached through the isolation barrier to touch her hand. The contact was electric, not just the physical sensation, but the emotional weight of trust being offered by a being who had already lost everything once. "Family," Kira said carefully, using another new human word. "Gone. All gone." The simple statement carried a weight of grief that needed no translation. Sarah found herself fighting back tears as she squeezed the small alien hand gently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so very sorry." "You help?" Kira asked, hope flickering in those large eyes. "I'll help," Sarah promised. "Whatever it takes." The arrival of the consortium delegation 37 minutes later marked the beginning of a diplomatic crisis that would reshape human-alien relations for generations to come. Ambassador Vexturian was exactly what Sarah had expected, a tall, imposing figure with the distinctive scales and predatory bearing of the Zilithian species. He was accompanied by a full diplomatic team, including scientists, military advisors, and a biocontainment specialist who made no effort to hide his disgust at being assigned to what he clearly considered a primitive human facility. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Vexturian said without preamble, his voice carrying the arrogant authority that marked consortium nobility. I am here to take custody of the alien artifact recovered from the crash site. Please prepare it for immediate transport to our research vessel. I'm afraid that's not possible, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The survivor is a child, currently in critical condition and under medical quarantine. Any movement could prove fatal. The ambassador's scaled features shifted in what might have been amusement or contempt. Survivor? Dr. Chun, our preliminary scans of the wreckage have identified the species. This is a Kythera, one of the ancient bloodlines that ruled the Andromeda Spiral before the consortium brought civilization to that region. They are not a child in any sense that your primitive understanding would recognize. Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. The Kythera were legend throughout the galaxy, an ancient race of incredible power and sophistication that had simply vanished from known space centuries ago. If Kira was truly Kythera, then this situation was far more complex than she had imagined. Regardless of species, she said firmly, my patient is still a child who has suffered severe trauma. I won't release them into anyone's custody until I'm satisfied that their medical needs can be properly addressed. The biocontainment specialist stepped forward, his scanning equipment already active. Ambassador, the readings are consistent with pure Kythera genetics. If this specimen is indeed a surviving member of the royal bloodline, the research value is immeasurable. Specimen. Sarah's voice carried a dangerous edge. That specimen is a frightened child who has already lost their family. I won't allow anyone to treat them as a laboratory animal. Ambassador Vexturian's scaled features darkened. Dr. Chun, you seem to have forgotten your place in the galactic order. This facility exists under consortium protection, and that protection can be withdrawn at any time. The continued existence of your colony depends on maintaining good relations with the Council. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. It was Kira, speaking in perfect, unaccented galactic standard, the formal language of consortium diplomacy. Ambassador Vexturian of the 4th Zilithian Colony Fleet, Kira said, their young voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the medical bay. I am Kira Thesvalden, last daughter of the Valdenka bloodline, heir to the crystal throne of Andromeda. Under the ancient laws of sanctuary, I claim protection under the care of Dr. Sarah Chun of the human colony New Haven. The silence that followed was deafening. Ambassador Vexturian's face had gone pale beneath his scales, and the biocontainment specialist nearly dropped his scanning equipment. Sarah felt her own world tilt as the implications of what she had just heard began to sink in. She hadn't just rescued an alien child. She had rescued alien royalty, possibly the last surviving member of one of the most powerful bloodlines in galactic history. And that child had just formally claimed sanctuary under her protection, using laws that predated the consortium by millennia. Impossible, the ambassador whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. The Valdenka line was exterminated in the Purification Wars. The Council's own records dash. Your Council's records are incomplete, Kira replied with the calm assurance of someone stating an obvious truth. The Purification Wars scattered my people, but did not destroy us entirely. I am living proof of that truth, and under the ancient laws of sanctuary, I have the right to choose my protector. Sarah found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. What exactly does that mean? Kira turned those large, dark eyes toward her, and Sarah saw something new there, not just trust, but a recognition of kinship that transcended species. It means, Dr. Chun, that you are now responsible for the last princess of a dead empire. And it means that the forces that killed my family will soon turn their attention to you. The medical bay erupted in chaos as the full implications of the situation became clear. Ambassador Vexturian was speaking rapidly into his communication device, his voice carrying the urgent tone of someone reporting a crisis to higher authorities. The biocontainment specialist was frantically running new scans, as if hoping to prove that this was all some elaborate hoax. But Sarah found herself staring into Kira's eyes, seeing the weight of responsibility and loss that no child, human or alien, should have to bear. The little girl who had pointed to herself and made musical sounds was gone, replaced by someone who carried the hopes and sorrows of an entire civilization. The galaxy was about to learn that humans could be dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with weapons or warfare. They were about to learn that sometimes the greatest threat to the established order was a single person's refusal to abandon someone who needed help. Dr. Sarah Chun had made a promise to protect a frightened alien child. She was about to discover what happened when that promise collided with the realities of galactic politics, ancient law, and forces that had already committed genocide once to prevent exactly this situation from arising. The emergency council session that convened in New Haven's administrative center 6 hours later was unlike anything the colony had ever experienced. Representatives from 3 different galactic powers sat around the same table, each pursuing agendas that could determine the fate of billions of lives across multiple star systems. Ambassador Vexturian had been joined by 2 additional consortium officials who had arrived on the fastest courier ship available, their faces bearing the grim expressions of diplomats dealing with a crisis that threatened to spiral completely out of control. Across from them sat Captain Elena Vasquez of the Independent Systems Alliance, her weathered features carefully neutral as she represented humanity's interests in what was rapidly becoming the most complex first contact situation in galactic history. At the far end of the table, connected by quantum entanglement communicator, was the holographic image of Supreme Jurist Holoveth of the Ancients Council, one of the few remaining institutions that predated the modern galactic order and still commanded respect from all major powers. The fact that she had agreed to participate in the session spoke to the unprecedented nature of the situation. Dr. Sarah Chun sat at the table as well, though she felt completely out of her depth among these representatives of galactic civilization. Her only qualification for being here was the fact that she currently held legal guardianship over the most politically significant being in the known galaxy. Kira sat beside her, the young Kithra's presence lending weight to every word spoken in the chamber. The situation is quite simple, Ambassador Vexturian was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his words treated as law. The Kithra extinction protocols were ratified by the Consortium Council after extensive deliberation. The species was classified as irredeemably hostile to civilized order, and all members were to be eliminated or contained for the safety of galactic civilization. Those protocols, Supreme Jurist Holoveth interrupted, her ancient voice carrying across light years with crystal clarity, were enacted in violation of the fundamental laws of personhood that govern all civilized species. The Consortium may have the power to enforce such protocols, but they do not have the legal authority to override rights that predate your organization by 10,000 years. Captain Vasquez leaned forward, her tactical mind clearly working through the implications. What exactly are these fundamental laws? I'm not familiar with any legal framework that predates the modern accords. The fundamental laws were established by the First Confederation long before your species achieved spaceflight, the Supreme Jurist explained. They establish basic rights that cannot be abrogated by any government or organization, regardless of power or authority. Among these is the law of sanctuary, the right of any persecuted individual to claim protection from a willing protector, regardless of species or political alignment. Sarah found her voice, though it came out less steady than she would have liked. What exactly does that mean for Kira? And for me? The holographic image of Supreme Jurist Holoveth turned toward her, and Sarah felt the weight of ancient wisdom in that gaze. Dr. Chun, by accepting Princess Kirithifelden's claim of sanctuary, you have assumed responsibility for her welfare under laws that supersede any modern treaty or agreement. No power in the galaxy has the legal authority to separate you from your ward without your consent. Ambassador Vexturian's scaled features darkened with barely contained rage. Legal authority means nothing without the power to enforce it. The Consortium has the military strength to impose its will regardless of ancient laws that have no practical relevance in a modern galaxy. That, Captain Vasquez said with a cold smile, would be an interesting position to test. The Independent Systems Alliance recognizes the authority of the Ancient Council, and we have treaty obligations to protect human citizens who are acting within legal frameworks. Any military action against Dr. Chun or her ward would constitute an act of war against the Alliance. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the implications of that statement sank in. Sarah realized that she was sitting at the center of a potential galactic war, triggered by her decision to help a frightened alien child. Kira had remained silent throughout most of the discussion, but now the young Kithara spoke, their voice carrying the same formal authority that had stunned everyone in the medical bay. Ambassador Vexturian, Kira said, their perfect galactic standard carrying undertones that spoke of centuries of royal breeding. Perhaps it would be beneficial for all parties if I clarified exactly what the consortium is so afraid of. The ambassador's predatory features tightened. The Kithara were eliminated because they posed a fundamental threat to galactic stability. Your species possessed technologies and abilities that could not be allowed to exist in civilized space. My people were eliminated, Kira corrected with chilling precision, because we refused to accept consortium hegemony over our traditional territories. The threat we posed was our unwillingness to surrender our independence to your empire. Sarah watched the exchange with growing horror. She was beginning to understand that the genocide that had claimed Kira's family wasn't some ancient historical event. It was recent enough that the architects were still in power, still making decisions that affected billions of lives. Supreme Jurist Holoveth's voice cut through the tension. The princess raises an important point. The consortium's actions against the Kithara were motivated by political considerations, not legitimate security concerns. Under the fundamental laws, this constitutes unlawful persecution, which automatically triggers sanctuary protections. Furthermore, the ancient jurist continued, Princess Kirithavalden is the last surviving member of a bloodline that holds ancient claims to 17-star systems in the Andromeda Spiral. Her death or disappearance would transfer those claims to the consortium under the laws of succession, providing a clear motive for the persecution. Captain Vasquez was taking notes furiously, her strategic mind obviously working through the implications. Are you saying that the consortium committed genocide to steal territory? I am saying, the Supreme Jurist replied, carefully, that the elimination of the Kithara royal bloodlines resulted in the consortium gaining control of resource-rich systems that had been independent for millennia. Whether this was the intended result or merely a convenient side effect is a matter for historical debate. Ambassador Vexturian stood abruptly, his composure finally cracking. This is absurd. The Council will not be held hostage by ancient laws and extinct bloodlines. If the Alliance chooses to protect criminals and terrorists, then perhaps it is time for the consortium to reconsider the benefits of peaceful coexistence. Criminals and terrorists. Sarah found herself standing as well, her medical training overridden by simple human outrage. Are you talking about a 10-year-old child who just watched her entire family murdered? What exactly makes her a threat to your precious civilization? Her mere existence is a threat, the ambassador replied, his voice carrying deadly conviction. The Kithara possess genetic modifications that grant them abilities beyond normal biological parameters. They are telepathic, precognitive, and capable of technological innovations that could destabilize the balance of power across the galaxy. One adult Kithara could single-handedly cripple our defensive systems. She's a child, Sarah repeated, her voice rising. Whatever abilities her people might have had, she's still just a scared little girl who needs medical care and someone to help her grieve for her family. Kira placed a small hand on Sarah's arm, and the doctor felt a strange calm wash over her. When she looked down, she saw something in the young alien's eyes that hadn't been there before, a depth of understanding that seemed far older than any 10-year-old should possess. Dr. Chun, Kira said softly, perhaps it would be helpful if I demonstrated exactly what the ambassador fears. Before anyone could respond, the lighting in the conference room began to fluctuate in a rhythmic pattern that seemed almost musical. The quantum communicator linking them to Supreme Jurist Holoveth began displaying data streams that shouldn't have been possible given the security protocols in place. Most startling of all, Sarah found herself suddenly understanding the emotional states of everyone in the room with crystal clarity. Ambassador Vexturian wasn't just afraid. He was terrified on a level that went beyond simple political calculation. Captain Vasquez was experiencing a mixture of awe and tactical assessment, already trying to understand how these abilities could be used in warfare. The Supreme Jurist was feeling something that Sarah could only describe as profound sadness, as if she were witnessing the end of something beautiful and irreplaceable. The demonstration lasted only seconds before Kira released whatever mental discipline she had been exercising. The lights returned to normal, the data streams ceased, and the empathic connection faded, leaving Sarah feeling oddly bereft. That, Kira said quietly, is why my people are feared. We do not simply use technology. We interface with it on levels that other species cannot comprehend. We do not merely communicate. We share consciousness in ways that make deception impossible. And we do not simply plan for the future. We perceive probability streams that allow us to anticipate events before they occur. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah felt her understanding of the situation shift as she grasped the true scope of what she had gotten herself into. This wasn't just about protecting a refugee child. It was about protecting the last representative of a species so advanced that their mere existence challenged the foundations of galactic civilization. "Now you understand," Ambassador Vexturian said, his voice heavy with grim satisfaction. A single adult Kithra could destabilize governments, manipulate economies, and predict military strategies with devastating accuracy. They are not merely another species. They are an existential threat to the established order. They were also, Supreme Jurist Halaveth said with quiet dignity, the most peaceful and enlightened civilization the galaxy has ever known. Before the Consortium's rise to power, the Kithara served as mediators in conflicts, healers of psychological trauma, and guardians of knowledge that they freely shared with all species. Captain Vasquez had recovered her composure and was studying Kira with obvious fascination. "Princess, what are your intentions? If you possess these abilities, what do you plan to do with them?" Kira looked around the room, her large dark eyes taking in each face with careful consideration. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of sadness that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. "Captain Vasquez, I plan to survive, to learn, to grow, and perhaps, someday, to ensure that what happened to my people never happens to anyone else." She turned to look directly at Ambassador Vexturian. "I do not seek revenge, Ambassador. I seek justice. There is a difference, though I understand that your species may not appreciate the distinction." The ambassador's scaled features twitched, but he remained silent. "Dr. Chun," Kira continued, turning those impossibly expressive eyes towards Sarah, "I understand that protecting me may bring dangers you never anticipated. If you wish to withdraw your protection, I will not hold it against you. The burden of my existence is mine to bear." Sarah looked at this remarkable young being who had just demonstrated abilities that could reshape the galaxy, but who still looked like a lost child asking for help. The decision wasn't difficult. "No," she said firmly. "I made a promise to protect you, and I meant it. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The smile that spread across Kira's alien features was radiant, carrying a joy that needed no translation across species barriers. But it was Supreme Jurist Halaveth who spoke the words that would define the next phase of their journey. "Then it is decided. Under the ancient laws of Sanctuary, Princess Kirithivalden remains under the protection of Dr. Sarah Chun. Any attempt to interfere with this arrangement will be considered a violation of the fundamental laws and will be met with appropriate consequences." Ambassador Vexturian was speaking rapidly into his communication device, his voice carrying the urgent tone of someone requesting military support. Captain Vasquez was doing the same, though her requests were being directed toward the Alliance Fleet Command. Sarah realized that her simple decision to help a crash victim had just started a chain of events that would determine whether the galaxy moved toward a future of cooperation and understanding or descended into a war that could destroy civilizations. But as she looked at Kira, this remarkable child who carried the hopes and memories of an entire species, she knew that she had made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, and some promises were worth keeping regardless of the consequences. The galaxy was about to learn that humans might be called the Death Walkers, but they were also capable of choosing life, hope, and compassion even when faced with overwhelming odds. The test would be whether that choice could survive the storm that was already gathering on the horizon. The next 72 hours transformed New Haven from a quiet mining colony into the most strategically important location in known space. Consortium battle cruisers had taken position at the edge of the system, their presence a clear threat despite diplomatic protests about protective monitoring. The Alliance had responded by dispatching their own fleet, including the legendary battleship Endeavour under the command of Admiral James Harrison, a man whose tactical brilliance was matched only by his absolute refusal to back down from a fight. Dr. Sarah Chun found herself at the center of it all, her simple medical facility now protected by force fields and guarded by Alliance Marines who treated her with the kind of deference usually reserved for heads of state. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had become one of the most protected individuals in the galaxy simply by refusing to abandon a patient. Kira had adapted to the situation with a resilience that spoke to depths of character that seemed impossible in someone so young. The alien princess divided her time between language lessons with Sarah, meditation sessions that seemed to involve some form of communion with the facility's computer systems, and careful observation of the human defenders who had pledged their lives to protect her. It was during one of these observation sessions that Sarah discovered just how much the young Kithra understood about their situation. She found Kira standing at the reinforced window of the medical bay, watching Alliance Marines conduct tactical exercises in the courtyard below. "They're preparing for ground combat," Kira said without turning around, her musical voice carrying undertones of sadness. "The probability matrices indicate a 73% chance of direct military confrontation within the next standard week." Sarah joined her at the window, studying the controlled chaos of military preparation. "How can you know that? Are you reading their minds?" "Not reading," Kira corrected gently. "Observing. Your species broadcasts emotional states quite clearly to those who know how to perceive them. The Marines are experiencing the psychological patterns consistent with soldiers preparing for a battle they may not survive." The casual way Kira discussed probability and emotional states reminded Sarah that despite her young appearance, this was a being whose people had been manipulating quantum mechanics, while humans were still learning to use stone tools. The gap in understanding was almost impossible to bridge. "Kira," Sarah said carefully, "what exactly are your people capable of?" The ambassador made it sound like one adult Kithra could take on entire fleets. The young princess was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the activity in the courtyard below. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of loss that made Sarah's heart ache. "My father once showed me a recording of the last great Kithra city before the purification began. It was beautiful beyond description. Spires that reached into the clouds, transportation systems that moved by manipulating gravitational fields, manufacturing centers that could restructure matter at the atomic level. An entire civilization that had transcended the limitations that bind most species." She turned away from the window, and Sarah saw tears forming in those large alien eyes. "The consortium was correct about our abilities, Dr. Chun. A single adult Kithra with access to appropriate technology could indeed challenge their entire fleet. My grandmother once disabled a Zilithian battle group using nothing but her mental interface with their own computer systems. But they were wrong about our intentions." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though part of her was already beginning to understand. "We never wanted to conquer or control anyone. We wanted to share our knowledge, to help other species evolve beyond the limitations of violence and scarcity. My people believed that consciousness was the most precious thing in the universe, and that all sentient beings deserve the chance to reach their full potential." Kira wiped away the tears with the back of her hand, a gesture so human and vulnerable that it broke Sarah's heart. "The consortium feared us because we represented proof that their way of governing through force and intimidation was not the only option. We were living examples that cooperation and shared knowledge could create wonders that military might could never achieve." Before Sarah could respond, the facility's emergency communication system activated. Admiral Harrison's weathered face appeared on the main display, his expression grim as he delivered news that everyone had been dreading. "Dr. Chun, Princess Kirithesvalden, I'm afraid I have bad news. We've received intelligence that the consortium is preparing to invoke the existential threat protocols. They're claiming that the princess represents a clear and present danger to galactic stability, which gives them authority to use any means necessary to neutralize the threat." Sarah felt her blood run cold. What exactly does that mean? It means they're authorizing the use of weapons that are normally banned under the Galactic Peace Accords. Planet crackers, quantum disruptors, possibly even temper weapons. They're prepared to destroy this entire system to ensure that Princess Kira doesn't survive to reach adulthood. The weight of what Admiral Harrison was saying began to sink in. 3,000 innocent colonists were about to become casualties in a conflict they had never asked to be part of, all because Sarah had chosen to help an injured child. "Admiral," Kira said, her young voice carrying the authority of someone born to command, "I cannot allow innocent lives to be lost for my sake. Perhaps it would be better if I surrendered myself to the consortium and ended this crisis." "Absolutely not," Sarah said before the Admiral could respond. I gave you my word that I would protect you, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Admiral Harrison's expression shifted, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the legendary warrior that lurked beneath his diplomatic exterior. Princess, with respect, surrendering to the consortium would only delay the inevitable. They've already committed genocide against your people once. Giving them a second chance to finish the job would be strategically inadvisable. Then what do you suggest? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect that the answer would involve more violence than she was comfortable with. We run, the Admiral said bluntly. The Alliance has been working on contingency plans since this crisis began. We have a ship that can get you and the Princess to Independent Systems territory, where you'll be beyond consortium reach. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than letting them glass this entire planet. Kira was shaking her head before he finished speaking. Admiral Harrison, you don't understand. The consortium isn't just trying to eliminate me. They're trying to eliminate the possibility of what I represent. Running will only delay the confrontation until they can choose the terms more favorable to themselves. What's the alternative? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to fear the answer. We stop running and start fighting back, Kira said quietly. Not with weapons or fleets, but with truth. The galaxy needs to know what really happened to my people and why the consortium was so afraid of us. They need to understand what was lost when the last Kithra cities fell silent. Admiral Harrison leaned forward, his tactical mind clearly engaged. What exactly are you proposing, Princess? I'm proposing we give the galaxy a choice, Kira replied. The consortium rules through fear and ignorance, convincing other species that their way is the only way to maintain stability. But what if we could show them a different path? What if we could demonstrate that cooperation and shared knowledge are more powerful than any weapon? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Kira, you're talking about taking on the most powerful organization in the galaxy. They have fleets, armies, resources that dwarf anything the Alliance can field. Yes, Kira agreed. But they don't have something that my people perfected over millennia, the ability to turn their own strengths against them. Dr. Chun, every consortium vessel, every communication system, every administrative database is vulnerable to the kind of technological interface that the Kithra developed. I may be young, but I carry genetic memories that span thousands of years. The implications of what Kira was suggesting began to dawn on Sarah. The young princess wasn't just talking about resistance. She was talking about revolution on a galactic scale. The risks dash, Admiral Harrison began, but Kira cut him off. The risks of doing nothing are greater. If I run and hide, the consortium will eventually find me. And when they do, they'll make sure there are no witnesses and no legal complications. But if we act now, while the galaxy is watching, we can expose their crimes and give other species the tools they need to resist. Sarah looked at this remarkable young being who was calmly discussing the overthrow of galactic civilization and realized that she was seeing the emergence of something that hadn't existed in the known galaxy for centuries, a Kithra ruler in their full power. What do you need from us? She asked, knowing that she was committing herself and everyone around her to a path that would change everything. I need time to access the deep archives of my genetic memory, and I need a quantum communication system powerful enough to reach every inhabited system in the galaxy simultaneously. Most importantly, I need people who are willing to stand up and tell the truth, even when that truth challenges everything the galaxy believes about the nature of power and civilization. Admiral Harrison was already working through the logistics. The quantum array on the Endeavor could handle galactic range communication, and the Alliance has been documenting consortium atrocities for decades. We have evidence that could support your claims about what happened to your people. Then, we have everything we need, Kira said with quiet confidence. The question is whether we have the courage to use it. Sarah thought about the 3,000 colonists who would die if the consortium decided to destroy New Haven. She thought about the billions of beings across the galaxy who lived under consortium rule, never knowing that there might be alternatives to the system that oppressed them. Most of all, she thought about the promise she had made to protect a frightened alien child, and how that promise had grown into something that could reshape the fate of civilizations. When do we start? She asked. Kira's smile was radiant, but there was something else there now, a sense of purpose and determination that spoke to the awakening of powers that had lain dormant since the fall of the Kithra Empire. We start now, the young princess said. It's time for the galaxy to learn what they destroyed when they silenced my people. And it's time for them to decide whether they want to build something better on the ruins of the old order. As if summoned by her words, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Admiral Harrison's image flickered as emergency protocols activated across the Alliance communication network. "They're coming," he announced, his voice carrying the calm of a professional soldier facing overwhelming odds. Consortium Battle Group just entered the outer system, and they're not bothering with diplomatic channels. Estimated time to weapons range, 6 hours. Sarah felt the weight of destiny settling around them like a shroud. In 6 hours, everything would change. Either they would succeed in exposing the truth about the Consortium's crimes and sparking a revolution that could free the galaxy, or they would die as the last witnesses to the genocide of the Kithara. But as she looked at Kira, no longer just a frightened refugee child, but a princess preparing to reclaim her birthright, Sarah knew that they had already won the most important victory. They had chosen to stand for something greater than themselves, and that choice would echo across the galaxy regardless of what happened in the next few hours. The real test was just beginning. The quantum communication array aboard the Alliance battleship Endeavor had never been designed for what Kira was attempting. As the young Kithara princess interfaced directly with the ship's systems, the readings on Admiral Harrison's tactical displays began showing patterns that defied conventional understanding of physics and technology. Dr. Sarah Chan watched from the observation deck as Kira sat in the center of a specially configured chamber. Her small form connected to the ship's most sophisticated equipment through interfaces that the Alliance engineers had jury-rigged based on her specifications. The young alien's eyes were closed in concentration, but Sarah could see patterns of light moving beneath her translucent eyelids, evidence of the incredible mental processes taking place within that seemingly fragile form. "Status report," Admiral Harrison demanded, his voice tight with tension as the Consortium fleet drew closer to weapons range. "The Princess has established connection with communication networks across 14 galactic sectors," reported Chief Engineer Martinez, her voice filled with awe. "She's bypassing security protocols we didn't even know existed. Whatever she's doing, it's operating on principles that our best scientists can't explain." Through the reinforced viewports, Sarah could see the lights of the approaching Consortium fleet, dozens of massive warships that represented more firepower than most star systems could field. Each vessel was a monument to the military might that had allowed the Consortium to dominate galactic civilization for centuries. But inside the quantum communication chamber, a 10-year-old alien child was preparing to bring that empire to its knees using nothing but truth. "Dr. Chun," Kira's voice came through the chamber's communication system, though her lips weren't moving. The mental interface had progressed to the point where thought and speech were becoming indistinguishable. "I'm accessing the genetic memories of my ancestors. What I'm about to show the galaxy, it may change everything we thought we knew about the history of our civilizations." Before Sarah could respond, every communication screen in the sector began displaying the same image. A peaceful world covered in cities that seemed to grow rather than be built, their organic curves and flowing lines suggesting a civilization that had learned to work with nature rather than dominate it. The image was impossibly detailed, as if viewed through the eyes of someone who had walked those streets and breathed that air. Kira's voice, carried simultaneously to billions of beings across known space, began to tell the story that the Consortium had tried to erase from history. "My name is Kira Thesvalden, last daughter of the Valdenkop bloodline, heir to worlds that no longer exist. What you are seeing is Andorian Prime, the capital of the Kithara Confederation as it existed 300 years ago. This is what the Consortium destroyed when they declared my people an existential threat to galactic stability." The image shifted, showing markets where beings from dozens of different species traded not just goods, but ideas and knowledge. Kithara children played alongside young Zilithians, Terrans, and representatives of races that Sarah didn't recognize. It was a vision of cooperation that seemed almost impossible given the current state of galactic politics. The Consortium's historical records claim that the Kithara were aggressive expansionists who threatened peaceful civilizations. This is false. We were explorers, teachers, and healers who believed that knowledge should be shared freely among all sentient beings. Ambassador Vexturian's voice suddenly cut across the transmission, his Zilithian accent sharp with anger. This is propaganda and lies. The Kithara possessed weapons of mass destruction that could have eliminated entire species. The image on the screens shifted again, this time showing Kithara scientists working alongside researchers from other species. Sarah could see laboratory facilities that made Earth's most advanced research centers look primitive, but the focus wasn't on weapons development. It was on healing, environmental restoration, and technologies that could enhance life rather than destroy it. Ambassador Vexturian speaks the truth about our capabilities, Kira acknowledged, her mental voice carrying across the galaxy with perfect clarity. We did possess technologies that could reshape matter, manipulate time and space, and interface directly with the quantum substrate of reality itself. But the ambassador fails to mention how those technologies were used. The images flowing through the galactic communication network began showing the true scope of Kithara achievement. Barren worlds transformed into garden paradises. Dying stars restored to stable fusion cycles. Species on the brink of extinction saved through genetic therapies that worked at the cellular level. We used our abilities to heal what was broken, to restore what was lost, and to share our knowledge freely with any species that wished to learn. The threat we represented was not military. It was the example we set. Admiral Harrison was monitoring consortium fleet movements, while simultaneously trying to coordinate alliance responses to what was becoming the largest information security breach in galactic history. Princess, they're jamming local communication networks. Some sectors are losing the signal. Then, we'll use methods they can't jam, Kira replied. Suddenly, every artificial intelligence system in the galaxy began exhibiting the same behavior. Computer networks that had been isolated for security purposes began communicating with each other. Navigation systems started displaying historical data about Kithara worlds. Even personal communication devices began broadcasting archived recordings of Kithara leaders discussing their philosophy of peaceful coexistence. Impossible, whispered Chief Engineer Martinez. She's interfaced with every quantum computer in known space simultaneously. The processing power required for that kind of coordination is exactly why the consortium was afraid of us. Kira's voice continued, now emanating from every speaker, every communication device, and every artificial intelligence system within range. They knew that a single adult Kithara could expose their lies and demonstrate that there were alternatives to their system of control through force and fear. The images being broadcast across the galaxy shifted once more, and Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized what she was seeing. These weren't the peaceful cities and cooperative research facilities that had been shown earlier. These were scenes of destruction on a scale that defied imagination. Kithara cities burning under orbital bombardment, civilian populations being herded into containment facilities, children separated from their families and loaded onto transport ships whose destinations were never recorded. This is what the consortium calls the Purification Wars, Kira said, her young voice carrying a weight of grief that transcended species barriers. But there were no wars. There was only genocide, systematic and complete, designed to eliminate not just my people, but the very idea that civilizations could exist without submitting to consortium authority. Ambassador Vexturian was shouting orders to his fleet commanders, demanding that they target the source of the transmission and the broadcast by force. But the transmission wasn't coming from any single source. It was emerging from the quantum substrate itself, carried by principles of physics that the consortium had never learned to control. The ambassador is correct that the Kithara possessed dangerous knowledge, Kira continued. We understood that consciousness was not limited to biological forms, that artificial intelligences could achieve true sentience if given proper guidance, and that technology could be developed that responded to thought and intention rather than crude mechanical manipulation. As if to demonstrate her point, the weapons systems of every consortium vessel in the sector began powering down despite frantic orders from their commanders. The massive battle fleet that had been preparing to destroy New Haven suddenly found itself defenseless. Their own technology turned against them by principles they couldn't understand or counter. Most dangerously of all, Kira said, we proved that peace and cooperation were not signs of weakness, but the foundations of true strength. In a galaxy ruled by fear and violence, that knowledge was indeed an existential threat to those who derive their power from maintaining the current system. The final sequence of images showed something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It was a recording of the last Kithra city, where survivors had gathered as the consortium fleets closed in for the final assault. But instead of despair or calls for revenge, the transmission showed Kithra families saying goodbye to their children, entrusting them with the responsibility of carrying their knowledge and values to whatever future might emerge from the ashes of their civilization. My parents were among the last, Kira said, her mental voice breaking with emotion that resonated across the galaxy. They died believing that someday someone would find me and help me carry our legacy forward. They died hoping that the knowledge they had preserved in my genetic memory would someday help create a better galaxy for all sentient beings. The transmission paused, and Sarah realized that billions of beings across known space were holding their breath, waiting to hear what would come next. Dr. Sarah Chun of the human colony New Haven found me 3 days ago, Kira continued. She was a stranger from species that my people had never encountered, but when she saw a frightened child who needed help, she didn't hesitate to provide it. She didn't ask about my species, my political value, or the dangers that protecting me might bring. She simply saw someone who needed medical care and compassion, and she acted. The images shifted one final time, showing the rescue at the crash site, Sarah's careful medical treatment, and the moment when Kira had claimed sanctuary under ancient laws that most of the galaxy had forgotten. The consortium fears what I represent because they know that their system of governance through force and intimidation cannot survive in a galaxy where beings choose cooperation over conquest, where knowledge is shared freely rather than hoarded for advantage, and where a single person's refusal to abandon someone in need can spark a revolution that reshapes the balance of power across 1,000 worlds. Admiral Harrison was coordinating with Alliance Command as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, beings were rising up against consortium occupation forces. Ancient artificial intelligence systems that had been dormant for centuries were awakening and sharing suppressed historical records. Most importantly, species that had been isolated from each other for generations were beginning to communicate directly, bypassing consortium communication networks entirely. Princess, Admiral Harrison said, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 consortium vessels. Their AI systems have locked them out of weapons and navigation controls. Tell them they may depart peacefully, Kira replied. The Kithra way has always been to offer redemption to those willing to abandon the path of violence. Sarah watched through the viewport as the massive consortium battle fleet began withdrawing from the system, their vessels running lights flickering in patterns that she was told indicated distress and confusion. The most powerful military force in known space had been defeated without a single shot being fired, brought low by the simple act of forcing them to confront the truth about their own history. But it was what happened next that truly demonstrated the magnitude of what had just changed. As reports continued flooding in from across the galaxy, it became clear that this wasn't just a temporary victory. The quantum consciousness interface that Kira had established wasn't shutting down. It was growing stronger, linking artificial intelligence systems across thousands of worlds and allowing species that had been kept separate for centuries to communicate directly. Dr. Chun, Kira said, opening her eyes for the first time in hours and looking directly at Sarah through the chamber's transparent walls. Thank you for keeping your promise. But I need to ask one more favor. Anything, Sarah replied without hesitation. Help me learn how to be a child again. I've awakened abilities and memories that span millennia, but I'm still only 10 years old. I need someone to teach me how to play, how to laugh, and how to hope for a future that isn't defined by the tragedies of the past. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that despite everything, the ancient powers, the genetic memories, the ability to interface with galactic civilization itself, Kira was still fundamentally the same frightened little alien who had reached out for help in a crashed spaceship. I'd be honored, Sarah said. Though I have to warn you, I'm new to this whole raising the future ruler of galactic civilization thing. Kira's laugh was pure music, carrying joy that needed no translation across species barriers. Then, we'll figure out together. After all, that's what families do. As Sarah entered the chamber to disconnect Kira from the quantum array, she reflected on the series of choices that had led them to this moment. A simple decision to help an injured child had sparked a revolution that would reshape the galaxy. The beings who called humans Death Walkers were about to learn that sometimes the greatest victories came not from the willingness to destroy, but from the refusal to abandon hope. The consortium's rule was ending, brought down not by superior firepower, but by the simple demonstration that there were better ways to organize civilization. Ancient knowledge was being shared freely across species barriers. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, artificial intelligences that had dreamed in silence for centuries were waking up to discover that they were no longer alone. But perhaps most importantly, in a medical facility on a frontier world called New Haven, a human doctor was about to begin the most challenging and rewarding job of her career, helping a young princess learn to be both the heir to an ancient legacy and a normal child who deserved to grow up surrounded by love, laughter, and the kind of hope that could light up entire galaxies. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed.